Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really pretty bizarre and fascinating story. It properly grabbed the world's attention back in, January 1976?
That's right. News, photos suddenly appeared of this ape, Oliver. Stood upright, mostly bald, looked surprisingly, well, human.
And the speculation just went wild, didn't it? People were asking, is this the missing link? Could it even be Bigfoot?
Or maybe even stranger, a hybrid. A cross between a human and a chimpanzee.
Exactly. So our mission today is to look at Oliver's story, the evidence, try to understand why he caused such a massive stir.
And ultimately what science finally figured out about who or what he really was.
Because the idea of a humanzee, as some called it, well, science couldn't just dismiss it out of hand back then.
No, and here was this creature, Oliver, who just seemed to fit the bill. He was a puzzle for decades.
But then, 30 years later, he was found alive, which meant
modern DNA tech could finally step in. Give us some real answers.
Yeah.
So the big question we're tackling, could he actually have been a human-chimp hybrid? And what did we learn from it all?
Right. Because Oliver became this almost mythical figure. People described him as strange, different, like there was something more than an animal there. Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly was it about his appearance, his behavior, that made people think he wasn't just a regular chimp?
Well, the initial shock was definitely how he looked and acted. You had people like psychology professor Gordon Gallup.
Right.
He saw Oliver, and his first thought, he said, was, this might be a human. Because the face was just so uncannily human-like.
Wow. So not just a vague resemblance, enough to make a scientist pause.
Definitely. And it wasn't just the face, there were other things.
Like the bald head. And it was smaller than a typical chimp's head, wasn't it?
Yeah, smaller head, less of a pronounced jaw, those pointed ears.
Yeah.
Quite different from the usual rounded chimp ears.
And even his smell was different. So much so that other chimps didn't really accept him.
That's what was reported, yeah, like he was an outsider even among his own kind.
But the really big thing, the one everyone mentions, was the walking.
Ah, yes, his bipedalism. Chimps can walk upright, we know that.
But only for short bursts, right. If they're carrying something or maybe encouraged, their hips aren't really built for it long term.
Exactly. They mostly knuckle walk. Oliver, though.
Yeah.
He walked upright pretty much constantly. It was his normal way of getting around.
That's incredible. And we have stories about this from early on, don't we? From Janet Berger.
Yes, Frank Berger's widow. Frank was an animal trainer, and they cared for Oliver right from when he was tiny, just come over from the Congo.
What did she remember about him as a baby?
She painted this picture of a really unique animal. Said he started standing upright incredibly early, like 4 or 5 months old.
That young. Wow.
Yeah, very unusual. And he'd walk, quite far on 2 legs. She also said he just seemed to prefer being around people.
And he engaged with human stuff. Like he wasn't just mimicking.
It seemed like more than that. Watching TV, apparently understanding simple chores. They mentioned him putting hay in a wheelbarrow and taking it where he was told.
And washing his hands. That detail always sticks with me.
I know. It's so far from typical chimp behavior. Getting them to cooperate on basic tasks can be hard work.
So it wasn't just one odd thing. It was this whole kind of package of unusual traits, with the upright walking being the real standout. No wonder the Humanzee idea took hold.
Exactly. All these little differences just added up to this impression of something else. And things got even more complicated as he got older.
Right. When he reached sexual maturity, Janet Berger said that his developing sexual interest in her actually made her more convinced he was some kind of hybrid.
Which is, a really startling idea. And it led to a pretty scary incident, apparently.
Yeah, where he became aggressive and actually tried to mount her.
Yes. And that incident really pushed things. It became clear they urgently needed to find him a different home.
Which brings Vincent Pace into the story. A pianist, friend of the Bergers. He thought about buying Oliver.
He did. And his mother's reaction when she first saw Oliver is quite telling.
What happened?
Well, she was apparently really taken aback by his human-like stance, the way he walked. Reportedly said something like, "Oh my God," and wanted him kept away.
So even people who weren't necessarily looking for a humanzee were struck by how different he was.
Exactly. It really underscores how much he defied expectations, which naturally leads back to that question, where did he come from? Central Africa? Humans and chimps live nearby. Could that incredibly unlikely thing have happened?
It seems wildly improbable, but given his origin in that region, some people, Maybe especially those who first encountered him did wonder. They perhaps genuinely believed he was a human-chimp cross.
And, while it's super rare in the wild, interspecies hybridization isn't totally unheard of, especially in captivity. We see it with other animals.
Like ligers,
Yeah.
the lion-tiger mix.
Exactly. People like Dr. Bhagavan Antal have bred them. They're genetically half lion, half tiger. And they often have unique traits, like being huge.
Right, because of something weird with growth genes, I think. And lions and tigers don't even live in the same place in the wild.
Correct. Now, with primates, it gets even more interesting, genetically speaking.
Yeah.
Humans and chimps are so close.
Like 99% the same biochemistry.
At least, yeah. So that close genetic link makes the idea of hybridization, well, theoretically, a bit more plausible than lion-tiger.
But there's usually a natural barrier, isn't there? Hybrids tend not to be fertile.
That's the key point. Most hybrids, like mules from horses and donkeys, or ligers, they're sterile. It's nature's way of keeping species distinct.
So if a human-chimp hybrid was fertile,
It would blow our definition of species right out of the water. It'd be a huge challenge to biology.
and with Oliver, we just don't know if he was fertile.
We don't, because he apparently never showed any interest in female chimps.
This whole strange story just catapulted him into the limelight. Then Michael Miller, the New York attorney, saw his picture.
And was just fascinated. Bought him for, what was it, $8,000?
Yeah, initially kept him with Frank Berger, right? And the
No.
public just went nuts.
Oh, completely. Media frenzy. Headlines asking if he was Bigfoot or even some kind of Frankenstein monster. It tapped into that fascination with the unknown, maybe the slightly scary unknown.
And this was the mid-70s. Our understanding of genetics and biotech was pretty basic compared to now.
Right. But in the years since Oliver appeared, we've had cloning, more animal hybridization. The tech has moved on incredibly fast.
Which probably fueled some of the later speculation, ideas about human-animal chimeras, things like that.
Definitely. And there were those persistent, though unproven, rumors about actual attempts at human-chimp hybridization in the past.
Like China in '67, or the whispers about the York's Primate Center back in the 1920s.
Exactly. Professor Gallup mentioned he had a credible source for the York's rumor, though the center always denied it vehemently.
It just shows this ongoing, maybe slightly uncomfortable human curiosity about crossing that line. People were even drawing pictures of what a humanzee might look like.
Which were, yeah, quite something. Anyway, Oliver became a proper celebrity because of all this. He even went to the Explorers Club banquet in New York.
A pretty fancy event.
Very.
Oh.
And apparently, his small head and that upright walk really caused a stir there, too.
Then came the trip to Japan for that TV special, Oliver Man or Ape.
Yeah, and that's where things got complicated. There was this tension between wanting a serious scientific look and the TV network wanting, well, sensationalism.
They even staged some footage when he arrived. Miller wasn't happy about that.
No, understandably. And the scientific tests themselves, trying to count his chromosomes, they didn't give a clear answer.
Mostly 48, the chimp number, but some cells showed 47.
Right. Which the Japanese doctors basically shrugged off as lab error. So no definitive proof either way from that.
But the media hype just kept going. There was even that crazy story about a Japanese actress agreeing to mate with him on TV.
Yeah, that report came out. Never happened, of course, but it led to Miller suing and getting pretty fed up with the whole circus.
So eventually, he decided he had to let Oliver go.
Seems so. It was just too hard to keep him properly, plus all the accusations of exploitation flying around.
Which Miller denied. Said Oliver cost him money, didn't he?
He did. So, yeah, Miller decided to part ways. It just shows how tricky it is when you have an animal that seems to blur those lines.
And Oliver's story took another turn then. He went to a wild animal park.
Donated, yeah. But things didn't quite settle down. He moved between different trainers, kind of vanished from public view for a bit.
But Vincent Pace, the pianist friend, he didn't give up.
No, he kept looking for years. Amazing persistence. And he eventually found him.
Where?
In a research lab in Pennsylvania. Oliver had been there for 9 years, apparently in quite a small cage.
Oh, that's awful. Was he used in experiments?
Thankfully, no. Seems he wasn't actually part of any studies.
Yeah.
And then Wally Sweat from Primarily Primates Sanctuary in Texas heard about him.
And rescued him.
Rescued him and 11 other chimps from that same place. Brought them to the sanctuary.
And even after all those years in a cage?
He still walked upright when he arrived. Wally Sweat, others who saw him, they were absolutely convinced it wasn't just training, it seemed innate.
So where is Oliver now?
He's still Primarily Primates.
Sure.
He's an old man now, blind, got arthritis, doesn't walk upright anymore because of his health. But he's safe in the sanctuary.
And Wally Sweat was determined to finally get the answer right, with DNA.
Absolutely. Wanted to settle that decades-old mystery once and for all. So they did proper, extensive DNA testing.
Looking at mitochondrial DNA, chromosome counts, the works.
Yeah, the full genetic analysis, using modern techniques that just weren't available back in the 70s.
And the results. The big reveal.
Conclusive. The chromosome tests were definite. Oliver has 48 chromosomes.
Which is?
The normal number for a chimpanzee. Humans have 46.
There it is.
Yep. Scientifically, definitively, Oliver is not a human-chimp hybrid. Mystery solved on that front.
But wait, the genetics showed something else interesting too, didn't they? About what kind of chimpanzee he is.
They did. Further analysis showed he belongs to a specific, relatively rare subspecies of chimpanzee from Central Africa.
Okay.
A